welcome to the COVID Advocacy Exchange. I'm going to allow just a few extra seconds this morning as we're welcoming some individuals from a different audience to participate with us today. My name is Dave Fuehrer, and I'm with Gryt Health. Over the last 10 weeks, I have had the deep honor of introducing each one of these live sessions. And each one of these sessions almost represents more than I can possibly put into words. When we started this 3 months ago, we started having conversations with advocate leaders from around the world. We talked to the leaders of more than 60 advocacy organizations across disease areas to understand how COVID is affecting us, how it's affecting our patient communities, and what it means to our future. Each one of these sessions that we've co-created with this huge group has been built entirely on the issues that are affecting us the most and the ways that we want to collaborate, not only to get through COVID, but to get better because of COVID. This session has really personal meaning for me. And before I introduce a special guest who will welcome our panel today, I want to take just a moment to share with you why this topic, patient voice, is so remarkably important. I started my career as a researcher for industry. I worked in the pharmaceutical industry to understand patient experience. And intellectually, it was a career that I loved. I could never have imagined how being diagnosed with cancer twice in my 20s and then losing my dad to cancer as I was recovering from my second diagnosis would affect me. The trauma that these diagnoses bring to us and our families are oftentimes things we are not prepared to deal with. And even though I was a researcher, this situation affected me in a humanity way that I had never expected. And it took me years to be able to find my voice, to express what I was going through and the help that I needed. Me finding my voice is only possible because of the advocates that I modeled myself after. Many of you are here on this call today. You helped me find my voice. You helped me believe that I could talk about things that I didn't have words or language to speak about. And in these last 10 weeks together, we have spent now more than 10,000 hours live collaborating on these topics to be able to understand how they affect us, what our experience is, and what's most important to each of us. And as you hear from these speakers and panelists today, please use your voice, ask questions, make comments, join in from wherever you are. In fact, why don't we start that way? If you could use the chat box at the bottom of the screen, please let us know where in the world you are joining us from. As you're doing that, I have a humbling honor to introduce an individual who is at the helm of raising this topic, who has been a partner in building this program. And her team care deeply about our voice and how we integrate it into the future of healthcare. Won't you please help me welcome our special guest, Danielle Halstrom, who is the head of R&D and GPS for commercial communications at Bristol Myers Squibb. Danielle, thank you.
Dave, thank you so much for the warm welcome. It's so great to be here with all of you. I'm so grateful for our longstanding partnership with you and the Gryt team and for working with us to create the COVID Advocacy Exchange. This is such a special opportunity for us to bring all of you together. This platform has been so valuable for so many communities during what's really been an unprecedented time. It's allowed us to bring advocates from across the globe together, to synchronize our efforts, to share resources, to engage in live weekly discussions about key issues in healthcare, and really just to put faces together as we work through what's been a difficult time. To date, our session topics have focused on coalitions and collaboration, safely reopening clinical trials, mental health, well-being, and psychosocial support for patients, among many other topics. Every session has been based on the suggestions from you, our global advocates from around the world, on the issues that are most important to you right now. Though BMS and Gryt may have physically put this platform together, we couldn't have done it without the advocacy community. And we're so thankful for all of you for helping us prioritize these topics that are top of mind. Our intention with this exchange was to co-create the content on the platform with you, our advocate partners. For those who have participated in the sessions so far, you've been able to participate in thoughtful and meaningful discussions and chats. As Dave said, use the chat function. There's a lot of fun to be had there. You make up more than 900 people from around the world, 50 countries, who have registered for the exchange, representing a mix of advocates, patients, caregivers, healthcare providers, thought leaders, and influencers, as well as other members of the pharmaceutical industry. If you haven't been able to join sessions prior to now, that's okay too. We have all of that available and recorded as part of the exchange. I would encourage you to go back and watch those that mean something to you. In addition, there's a ton of on-demand content available on the platform, including resources from more than 40 patient advocacy groups from across various disease areas. So really take a minute and check that stuff out. As we look ahead to the future of the exchange, we're in the process of planning for what's the next generation of this platform going to look like. We would love your help. If you have thoughts on this, want to lend your voice, help us co-create, please reach out to Dave at Gryt and share your ideas and thoughts. Again, we're so grateful for you for being here, for engaging in the conversation, and for providing feedback. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Samit Hirawat, my colleague and friend at Bristol Myers Squibb. He's our Chief Medical Officer. He leads global drug development, and he's going to moderate our session today. If I were to give Dr. Hirawat another title, it might be Chief Advocacy Champion. He is a huge champion of encouraging the patient voice across the entire drug development continuum at BMS, and I'm just so proud that he's able to join us. He's a collaborative leader. He's responsible for leading the development organization across the entire therapeutic continuum. Under his guidance, BMS will ensure the progression of pipeline assets from proof of concept to commercialization through world-class clinical trial design. He brings rich experience and expertise to his role at BMS. Prior to joining our company last year, he served as Executive Vice President and Head of Oncology for Global Drug Development at Novartis, and has also led clinical development programs in multiple indications at PTC Therapeutics, as well as Pfizer and Pharmacia. He's a published author, he's presented at major congresses, and is a recipient of several government grants, academic, and corporate awards. So we're just thrilled to have him. With that, Samit, I will turn it over to you with my thank you.
Oh, thank you, Danielle. I did not expect that Chief Advocacy Officer title coming along, but I take it with honor, and I'm really pleased and honored to be part of this group of esteemed colleagues that I'm beginning to know through emails and chats over the last few weeks as we prepared for today. I'm really looking forward to learning more when I go through some of the CVs and the write-ups about you. I'm humbled, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today to learn a lot more about you, because to me, and I'm very passionate, as Danielle already said, about getting the patient's voice included as we think about developing drugs. Many a times over the last 20 years that I've been in the industry, I've observed that these voices that we want to hear from the patients over the last, or rather 10 years ago or 12 years ago, used to be called out for once the drug was close to being marketed or even after marketing. But over the last few years, and I would hear more from you about it, how things have evolved and changed. And I think we are at that cusp where we are trying to decipher what is the best time to get that voice included. If you ask me, it is right at the beginning of when the targets are identified, diseases are identified to be explored, or first in human studies are starting to be carried out. Because that's where you start to know where is the most impactful way to assess not only the efficacy of the drug, but the burden of development of a drug and the burden of the side effect that the drug might bring it along. So those are key features. From my own experiences perspective, I'm an oncologist by training, but as Danielle said, I've been doing drug development beyond oncology for some years now. And I certainly have learned my lessons, some not in the easiest possible ways, but how the caregivers are impacted, how children think about drug development and how they're impacted and their lives on an everyday basis are impacted, become very important as we think about clinical trials and how to execute on them. And we'll get into a lot more on that, and enough about me and my thoughts. And let me open it up. First of all, let's hear about our panelists. So Oriana, if you could just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll take it from there.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I would say hello to everyone who are attending and to the panelists. And thank to Gryt for the invitation. It's such an honor to be here. About me, my name is Oriana. I'm a small cell ovarian cancer survivor and patient advocate. Just to frame, I would like to say some things about my type of cancer. Small cell ovarian cancer is considered the most aggressive and rare form of ovarian cancer. Nowadays are described about 500 cases in literature, and generally this type of cancer is diagnosed in young women. The average age is 23, 24. Until 2014, we barely find information about this type of cancer, and the research were almost done in 80s. So I was originally diagnosed in 2011, and between 2011 and 2015, I suffered 4 relapses. While I was struggling with my own despair, with my distress, well, my overall vulnerability, I find the need to self-advocate. And when in 2015, I found a new relapse. This one were the largest one was I had 5 tumors in my abdomen, and micro tumors were really spread. This time I found myself really scared. I thought the death was unavoidable. But I decided to look for immunotherapy, and I found a place in Europe to try it. And actually this shifted my destiny. 5 weeks later, my tumors were shrinking, and about a year later, I was considered NET, and I'm still keeping this response. I ended up being treated in 5 different places, 3 in Portugal, in 2 other places in Europe. Nowadays, I'm a student of the patient expert course at European Patients Academy, and I'm also on Rare 2030 foresight in rare disease policy. And recently I founded my website for psychological support to cancer patients, survivors, and caregivers or their relatives. So that's it for now.
Well, you know, thank you so much for sharing that. And as you can see from the chat, people really appreciate your courage, and they really thank you for sharing that openly. We'll get more to you, of course, but let's go to Tamás. Tamás, could you tell us about your vast experience and what you've been doing?
Thank you, and hello, everyone. My name is Tamás Bereczky. I come originally from Hungary, but I live in Germany now. Have been been in Germany for a couple of years. I wear many hats. First of all, I'm myself a patient. I'm an HIV patient. Have been living with HIV for almost 20 years now. I also had and have a couple of other chronic illnesses. And so I work in the field of HIV and viral hepatitis, mental health, as a patient advocate, but I'm also a researcher, and I'm also with the European Patients Academy for Therapeutic Innovation, where Oriana is one of our students currently. And the EUPATI, as the abbreviation goes, is a pan-European initiative teaching patients, patient experts, patient advocates about how to do their work better, how to deploy evidence-based advocacy, how to work with patient communities, but also with other stakeholders in order to make the patient's voice heard. Myself, I'm a linguist, I'm a psychologist, and I have a PhD in social psychology, and my research field is patient advocacy and patient education. So I do both theory of patient advocacy, but I also do a lot of practical work. So I think that's the bottom line.
Well, thank you, Tamás, and certainly a lot to learn from you, your experiences, and we'll certainly learn more today. But let's go to Kathleen. Kathleen, you've obviously amassed a different type of experience, and you've been helping the agency in thinking through in many tough discussions as well. So could you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Certainly. Good afternoon to everyone. First and foremost, I would like to thank Dave from Gryt Health and his amazing team, and Bristol Myers Squibb for the opportunity to participate. This has turned out to be a wonderful collaborative and sharing experience for everyone engaged, and I encourage more patient advocates and their organizations to get involved as we move forward. My history is simple. I was diagnosed with lupus when I was in college 36 years ago, and had been sick since I was a child. No one could figure out what was wrong with me. Since then, I have been diagnosed with multiple autoimmune diseases. I live with 8 different autoimmune diseases and comorbid conditions. I currently take 48 drugs a day. I have kidney disease. The veins are shot in my arms for all my lab work. I get infusions regularly, so I'm on my 3rd port. And I take 48 drugs a day, like I said, and I'm blind in my right eye. I'm extremely educated and empowered, but I wasn't born that way. I am also a national patient advocate for rheumatology, autoimmune, and lupus, amongst other things. I have learned a lot over the years, and I'm president and CEO of Lupus and Allied Diseases Association, which is the 3rd national lupus organization. It's run out of my home in rural upstate New York, in Verona, New York. And our entire board is people with lupus and other autoimmune diseases and their loved ones, their care partners. We're an all-volunteer organization. No one has ever been paid. We were founded in 1978 in Utica, New York. We are all about driving the voice, using the voice as a catalyst to amplify the patient perspective throughout the regulatory process, throughout research, throughout healthcare policy, access to care issues. We feel very passionately that the patient perspective should be present and included as a stakeholder at the table in all decision-making in healthcare and research. It has taken decades for us to get here, kicking and screaming and trying to open the door. And I'm so glad that we've arrived and that we get to collaborate on initiatives like this. Again, thank you all for being here.
Kathleen, thank you so much, and more power to you, and we stand with you for making your voice heard, and many of the other people that you support, their voices heard too. Begonya, you've obviously ventured out into the pediatric side as well as advocating for rare diseases. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Hello to everybody. Good morning and good afternoon for the people that are joining from Europe. My name is Begonya and I'm working for more than 10 years in the field of advocacy. My expertise basically it's focused in the field obviously of pediatrics and mainly in the field of rare diseases because, as you know, basically rare diseases affect children. Basically 80% of these diseases are genetic, and it means that basically the population that are patients are kids, and also when we said kids, also we said the family. I'm working in the patient engagement in research department at Sant Joan de Déu Children's Hospital in Barcelona. This is the largest pediatric hospital in our country. And mainly my role is focused to ensure that the voice of the patients and the voice of the family is part of the different research initiatives in which our institution is involved. It means clinical trials because we have a very large unit working with pediatric trials, all the different medical specialties, and also trials for pregnant women. And also I'm involved in other kind of projects such as the Share for Rare initiative that it's coordinated by our institution and it's granted by the European Commission. In this sense, and specifically in this project, we are working so close with the families of children with rare conditions and with adults with rare conditions to improve the knowledge that we have about these diseases. Because as you suppose you are aware, in these conditions, there is a big limitation of the knowledge about the natural history of these conditions. And we think, and we have the expertise in other previous projects, that collecting information and data from the patients and the families, we can increase this knowledge and probably promote other initiatives, such as the research of new therapeutical opportunities. I'm a patient advocate. I'm a caregiver of a young adult with a cerebral palsy. And I'm also coordinating another initiative that it's EUPATI. This is the European Young Persons Advisory Group network that mainly ensures that young patients are involved in the drug development process, and in this case working in a collaborative way across Europe, because pediatric trials are not an initiative that only happen in one site or in one country, and for us it's crucial to have this collaborative approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Begonya. Let's get into a little bit of the meat of this dialogue. And Tamás, maybe let me start with you. Can you describe what you believe is the definition of patient advocacy? Is every patient an advocate? I believe so, but I would like to hear your thoughts. Or, meaning as Oriana said, she had to advocate for herself. So that's one type of an advocate. But in general, can every patient be an advocate? Or is every advocate required to be a patient?
No. and partly yes. I think that I would take a step back. So first of all, I think it's important to point out that contrary to what we keep hearing, that everybody is a patient, I think that not everybody is a patient, and that's fine. Everybody is potentially a patient, so it may happen to you eventually, but it's not like you are automatically a patient, because we see from the research that's out there that being a patient, and that also then leads to becoming an advocate, actually constitutes a distinct identity, just because it defines your place in society and also how you interact with other people. So being a patient also means that you actually have a distinct position within society and in your life. Now that may spur you to become an advocate, but not necessarily, and that's also fine. But if you decide to become an advocate, then I think it's important that you also acknowledge that you're actually a patient advocate. And so that means that you either live with an illness, or you're affected by an illness if you're a caregiver, and you're an advocate as a caregiver. That means that you're affected by that given illness, so that you actually know immediately, you have this immediate experience of what it means to live with that disease or with that condition. And then if you so decide, then of course you can also cast a wider net and say that you want to represent other people's interests, and you want to work along those interests and go beyond your own circle of what you would like to achieve, and you want to represent the wider community. And so what we try to do at the Patients Academy is to give you the tools that you can do that type of work. But that's also based on this recognition that while there are different types of patients, so patients can be patient representatives or patient advocates or just individual patients, or caregivers, family members. However, they are defined as patients, so they either live with a condition or they are affected by a condition, and they also acknowledge that. I think that's very important, that you stand by what you have, and that helps you then to also stand by other people if they are in a similar situation. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. In fact, if I were to take the gist out of it, what you're explaining is that if you decide to become an advocate, you're not just speaking for yourself, but rather you have to have a non-biased approach to a larger community that you're going to ultimately serve or represent.
Yes.
So that you're taking the overall thought process forward. Now, keeping that in mind, Begonya, if you think about pediatric patients, and sometimes, and in drug development, it is very true that you don't develop drugs first for pediatric patients. You first start with the adults, then bring it back down to the younger ones. And I had an experience recently in my own life that my daughter was invited to an ad board. She's 11 years old, and she was invited to an ad board where she was asked questions around, a particular clinical trial in a particular disease setting that she's part of. And the experience was very interesting when she came back, and we talked a little bit about that. But how do you think, you touched on it a little bit in your opening dialogue, but can you define a little bit more from a patient advocacy perspective, the pediatric advocacy? How does one think about it? How does one get involved in it? And what the nuances could be for that population?
Yeah, the main point that I want to mention about the pediatric advocacy is that it's feasible, because we have a lot of expertise in the field of the adults. We have more trials, obviously, in the field of the adults, but children sometimes are forgotten in this process. And also children, they are suffering diseases. And this is the main point that I want to highlight. It's feasible. Obviously, we need to protect these kids. We need to train these kids. We need to explain which is the process to be part of a trial. And once they have the knowledge and the skills, it's quite easy to involve these kids in activities related to the drug development process. We can do it in different ways. We set up activities specifically with young patients with a specific condition, because sometimes the project requires this methodology, but in other cases we centralize the request to involve patients in these projects through the young persons advisory groups that already I mentioned. The first one was set up in 2016 in Liverpool in UK, and now at this moment around Europe there are more than 20 groups, and also there are groups in United States, in Canada, in Japan, in many countries. Which is the idea of our groups? They are permanent groups. They are linked to a pediatric hospital. The staff of the hospital, it's responsible to provide to them the training and to facilitate the right methodology to involve them in the drug development process. As you said at the very beginning, for us, the most meaningful moment to involve the young patients in the drug development process, it's in the design of these projects, of the protocol, of the clinical trial, because this is the right moment to hear their needs. We have many concerns and many needs in the field of pediatrics, starting from the point of view that most of the trials arrive to the field of children coming from the field of the adults, and sometimes the protocols are not feasible for children, but also there are diseases that only are suffering children. And it means that we need to listen them, think that they are also beyond to be a patient, beyond to be a patient, yes, they are kids, and they have the life in the school, the life with the family, and the life with the friends, and many other things that we need to listen and try to shape and readapt these protocols to the needs of the patients. This is the most meaningful moment for us, but the approach that we have, it involves the young patients along the whole process. And also for us, it's very, very important the moment in which we need to recruit the patients, inform about the design of this protocol. We face many problems in our hospital and in general in the pediatric hospitals when we need to explain the informed consent to a young patient, because usually it's a complicated document. This is another area in which with the YPACs we can improve the information and the format about this document. And the last part of the process obviously is when we need to spread the outcomes of a research clinical trial. And in this sense also it's very important to hear the voice of the patients, because sometimes also these life summaries are not very focused in the needs of the child. There are many opportunities, and I think that the most important thing is belief that we can involve the children and work hand by hand with them.
Thank you for that. And I think, as you said, of the 7,000 odd rare diseases that have been described, 80% of them, because they're genetic, 80% of them certainly afflict children. So maybe we start with Oriana, and then I'll come back to you, Begonya. For the rare disease community, that also requires a special attention, and we have to do more. And could you, from your perspective and your experiences, Oriana, do you have, I know that for your particular disease you advocated, and now that you become more involved, are there success stories that you're beginning to see in the rare disease community as you think about advocacy that are coming through? And maybe that also applies to the pediatric rare diseases. Then Begonya, if you could comment about that after Oriana.
Yes, for example, even in Portugal, I met recently another girl with also a rare cancer, and she also self-advocates for herself, and she finds a treatment that she wouldn't find in Portugal, or that she couldn't get it, and nowadays her story would be really different. And obviously, when you have a life-threatening condition and it's rare, you don't have, it's hardly to find an expert to your disease and find someone in your local hospital to dedicate the time you need. So when you start to read about rare disease, you find a lot of stories. Even recently, New York Times published an article about 4 families who did the different to their kids because they were involved. Some became patient advocates, and I even remember 2 parents who changed their career. They went to the college and studied to become scientists. So I think it's make all the difference to involve patients when you have the rare disease, because honestly, the system, it's not prepared to look carefully for those we have a rare disease.
Thank you. Begonya, you want to add something to that from your perspective?
Yes, I fully agree with Joana that we need not to face this need of expertise to take care of the patients with rare diseases. We need to face also the real numbers about rare conditions, because there are thousands of rare diseases. It's so difficult sometimes not to gather this expertise in one center, because we have a very, very small numbers. In some diseases we can have 1 or 2 patients, and it's hard to promote research with these numbers because it's basically impossible, no? And in this sense, as I said previously, we know that the patients and the caregivers of a patient with a rare condition, they have a lot of knowledge that sometimes never arrive to the hospitals. In this sense, we designed the Share for Rare platform that basically allows to connect patients and families around the world, to delete any kind of boundary related to the language and the geographical dispersion, and facilitate the donation of this medical information. This big data paradigm help us to analyze this information and describe better these conditions, help us, if it's need, to find the patient to be also part of clinical trials, because sometimes it's so hard to recruit patients because the rare diseases patient registries in some countries are not mandatory. And it means that the only way sometimes to arrive to the patients, it's through the patient's organizations or directly to the patients. These platforms, these digital resources facilitate, connect the patients, and at the end help to collaborate with the researchers that have interest in these conditions. We think that this is the new world. Sometimes we think that we are a little late with the technology, because it's very well implemented in other chronic conditions or even in other fields different of health. But for us, this collective intelligence approach is the key point to move forward and to foster research in the rare conditions field.
Yeah, thank you, Begonya, because I remember being just going back about a decade. There were no good registries, and especially the big data analysis was not really available. And for the rare diseases that I was working on, there was literally a paucity of longitudinal history data for a given disease. And if there is no drug approved for such diseases, especially in pediatric rare diseases, it's hard to come up even with regulatory endpoints that you could actually pursue. And then it makes it even more difficult to develop drugs and to be able to get them to the patients who really need it. A very good point that you made, and especially the connectivity of rare diseases, pediatric patients to clinical trials. It's a very, very important point that you bring up. Thank you for that. Let me just switch gears a little bit. And Kathleen, I'll come to you now, and also Tamás, to you. Is there a typical journey for a patient or a caregiver to become an empowered advocate? Maybe you can describe through your own experience or through your mindset. Maybe we'll start with Kathleen and Tamás, then we'll come to you.
Thank you. No, there is not a typical journey to becoming an advocate. I speak about this all over the United States. It usually takes a life-changing event to happen to someone that they become an activist or passionate about a cause. When it comes to being diagnosed with an acute or chronic disease, you have your whole life planned out. With lupus, it usually impacts people who are young during the prime of their life. I happen to be in college, but was sick since the time I was a child, as I stated before. Nobody could diagnose me. When I finally did get the diagnosis, I had organ damage, and it was a little late. So you have your whole life laid out in front of you. For me, I wanted to be an ambassador, go off to Europe, live the life of a Danielle Steele character, marry a prince, write a novel, and have this wonderful, vibrant, giving life. All of a sudden, I was thrown backwards. I was given a diagnosis of a disease, systemic lupus erythematosus. I couldn't pronounce it, couldn't spell it, much less learn how to live with it. There are very few treatments. At that time, there were even less. There was only one rheumatologist in rural upstate New York to treat me. The diagnosis is very difficult, and they have to rule out other conditions. At that point, I needed to revamp. Instead of going into crisis, I took a step backwards, scratched my head, and said, okay, what are you going to do with the rest of your life, Kathleen? I decided to become as educated and as empowered as possible, as we call this self-advocacy, to learn as much as I could about the treatments, the doctors, the best facilities, the research taking place, and what my future might look like, what I should plan to do. At that time, in my travels, I became affiliated as a volunteer with the local Lupus Foundation of America chapter, found out that I had a talent to speak in front of cameras and to educate the other patient stakeholders. The leader passed away the next year. I went in as vice president and then president. And when I became permanently disabled and couldn't really go out of the house 5 days a week, we moved the organization to my home, where it remains today. Virtual connections allow us to reach people all over the United States. I'd like to point out that we fill the void in the lupus community. We don't try to duplicate the efforts of the other organizations, the Lupus Foundation of America and Lupus Research Alliance. Both are amazing organizations with great services. We fund the research at both. We try to amplify the patient voice, as I stated before. So I was not born an advocate. but a life-changing experience threw me backwards, threw a wrench in my plans. And all of my travels and all of my roads and all of my previous jobs trained me to become one of the most passionate and vocal and tenacious advocates you'll come across. And I believe that that's the story usually with most people, that life-altering, usually negative, a serious adverse event happens, and you pick up the sword, you turn your emotion into motion, and you turn your outrage into action, and you try to make a difference, whether it's healthcare or education or regulatory process, whether it's fighting for animals or fighting for the environment. You become an activist. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Tamás?
You know, it's so interesting because to reflect on what Kathleen said, it was fascinating to listen to. But she started with saying that there's no typical path for a patient to become a patient advocate. But in fact, if you look at, as she also very succinctly described, if you look at larger groups of patient advocates, then there are similarities. So there are certain features that are very similar. One is, which Kathleen also mentioned, is that there is always a life-altering event, something that happens, be that a diagnosis of yourself or a diagnosis of someone who's close to you. And then there's another thing that Kathleen mentioned, and I would like to point out, and that's the emotions associated with this whole process, which we often forget about. But actually, when Kathleen speaks about outrage, which is also sometimes described as anger or compassion or love or scare, that's also something that's very much part of this journey, that's very much part of this process. And education, again, something that we heard from Kathleen. So there are certain milestones or certain features that you will find in the journey of most patient advocates. So while our lives, our trajectories are very different, however, you can confidently say that, that there are some marked similarities in this. One is receiving a diagnosis, and which we call in the literature a biographical disruption, when something happens to your life that changes your life, or because someone in your family undergoes a diagnosis or suffers from a disease, or yourself suffer from a disease, and you get this diagnosis, and that immediately repositions you in your life and in society, and you try to adapt to this. And this adaptation process is also associated with a lot of emotions. And then it comes down to how you can translate these emotions or convert these emotions into productive work. So converting passion into action, if I quote you well, Kathleen, is what really matters. And then education is paramount. And this is why we try to, you know, provide this type of education in a formalized way through the patient academy. But most patient advocates do not necessarily go through such a formal education process. But you always find in the background, and this is also well described in the literature of patient advocacy, that self-education and then systematic education within the community is essential, so that you acquire the language, that you acquire that toolkit that allows you to speak to other stakeholders in the research and development process, or in science in general, on an eye-to-eye level, so that it really empowers you and brings you to the level that's needed. And it's not, I mean, it's not like better or worse, it's just a different plane, so that you can interact with other stakeholders and work for better science, and work for better outcomes, and work for better policy decisions. So I think these are very similar things that happen to all of us. The shock, the anger, the scare, the learning, and then coming to a conclusion when you decide that, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to change, and this is how I'm going to change. These are very similar in most patient advocates' lives.
Well, thank you so much. That's very, very clear. And I think both you and Kathleen have described uh, a little bit of a different path, but leading to the same point, that you become more educated and you again are speaking your mind, and again bring the energy to that community to be able to have that dialogue with the various stakeholders here to be able to further the science, find new treatments, and certainly not be burdensome to anybody in terms of taking the science and the meaningful outcomes forward, especially from a patient perspective. You want the treatments, but you also want to make sure that the quality of life, to the extent that it can be preserved, should be preserved. Keeping that in mind, Oriana, coming back to you, being an advocate, um, does that also come along with educating the community or a patient to have the right dialogue and the communication with your healthcare provider, caregiver? You talked about your own self-advocacy. How do you see that has changed your mindset, your thinking from the time when you were not a general advocate for everybody, but for yourself, versus now that you're going through the education of being an advocate? How do you see that changing the dialogue between yourself and your healthcare provider, for example?
Well, being advocate for myself, it's really more easier, because when you decide to yourself, the things you decide for you have a consequence on you. So you don't, if you decide something that when goes wrong, it's on you. Nowadays, I feel that to help other people, I need to know more. That's why I'm also trying to have more knowledge, because I want to have to make advocacy based on evidence and not on my gut. That happened to me sometimes, actually, because I didn't have information, and I had to decide it for myself. So basically, when I find some papers during my journey with cancer, I was doing the opposite. I was finding a paper, and on that paper, the results were not so good for the girl. And so my thought was, okay, I don't want this for me, because this will probably don't happen and will not work. So I didn't have information about what would be the best treatment, but I was reading the papers and seeing the information of what is not being good for some, and took my own decisions based on that. So I have the gut of immunotherapy, and I went to immunotherapy. But nowadays, I feel that if I'm trying to help someone, I need to know more and find the accurate community, the accurate doctors, and basically also helped me a lot to have found a community of my own type of cancer. I'm on a group. The patients there are almost all American, but I met other European girls too. And since the very beginning, this community had a lot of impact on my choices. Back to my story, I was diagnosed in 2011 and I was only 22. It's normal that when you have 22, you don't have a lot of health literacy. You don't have any references of what, if the doctors are doing the right thing or the best thing for you or not. And I also had a rare disease, so I had no information at all. And when I found this community, I was sure on that time that I was being neglected. That was something that I was just feeling, but I had no way to know. And when I found this community, it was the wake up, you know. And since then, I started self-advocate, and these were changing the way I decide, I take decisions, and I communicate with doctors. I have my first relapse in 2012. Actually, I found this relapse because I found this community who told me that I was not having the best approach to surveillance, to make this. I was not doing the best scans to know if I'm sick or not. And I found this relapse because I went to a private doctor. And when I went to the hospital where I was treated, the meeting with the gynecological director was like this. So if you are not so young, we would put you in the palliative care. But once you are young, we will try to operate you. And this was the push for me to decide, okay, I will look for another place to treat myself. And I went to another place, actually, this time in abroad, in Spain. And it was totally different. The doctor, the surgeon there were like, how old are you? You are 22, you are so young, we need to fight for you. No, not 22, I was 23 already. So he was like, okay, he was committed to me. So this is something I share nowadays with the patients, that they need to find a medical team who is committed, who is working with you in your expectations. You are very young, you want a treatment to heal you, to give you the best life quality. So you need to find a place where your team is trying the same you want, or obviously doctors cannot know what is the best approach, but they can honestly tell, they can honestly find another medical team for you or research with you. So I think this helps a lot, and I think is the basic and is the so-called centric patient approach we are talking nowadays. That's the point.
Well, thank you for sharing your experience, Oriana. I can definitely see how you went through your journey and how you learned through there and how you've evolved, and you're now teaching others to do the same. I'll switch the topics and get into the thick of things now in terms of the patient voice. I can tell you from my perspective, as I think back when I became a doctor, I thought that I knew it all because the books told me so. But as you live through the life of being a physician, treating patients, and in the pharmaceutical industry, developing drugs, not every patient fits into that efficacy curve that we see, and not every patient experiences the side effects that the product label tells you. So you keep on learning. I've also sat through many an ad boards where you have physicians, the patients, and us, myself, sitting in the ad board, where the philosophy around what we are seeking from a clinical trial does not match between the physician and the patient or what the company is looking for. So it's been an interesting learning for myself, and I have become a big believer that before we do a registration trial, we shouldn't start that until we've actually sought some input from the patient or patient advocate to really see if that fits the place where we want to be at the end of the day, because otherwise, what's the point of developing a drug if you're not keeping that in mind as to what the ultimate goal is? So maybe, Kathleen, I come to you. What's been your experience in terms of having a patient's voice be heard in the process of research and development, especially development research? We'll come back to it because it has a different connotation, how early you can intervene in that thought process, but definitely as you see it in the clinical trials and then later on, what's been your experience?
Well, first and foremost, I was very fortunate to participate in clinical trials, and in doing that process taught me to be even more educated and empowered about my disease, and to be an adult and to share and disseminate information with my treatment team, highlighting that the treatment team is important too. And in that process, I learned about the FDA and about drug approval and development. I think it is extremely important for the patient voice to be present and heard at the table, as I stated previously, but in R&D. So that means at ground level, not all the way before an AdCom. By then, you're so many steps further along in the process. The patient voice needs to be there when the company is thinking about the trial design, you know, because what a company representative or a researcher or a treating physician or a venture capitalist thinks about is not what a person living and struggling with that disease on a daily basis thinks about. We have things that we're willing to risk. We have benefits that we want, and we can assume certain risks if the outcomes that we desire are there. I am very fortunate to have presented before the FDA written and oral comments approximately 42 times through the process. Each time I learn a little more about how an advisory committee meeting works. I've been able to work with drug manufacturers and device manufacturers early on to help them choose patient panels where there's a very diverse group of people. But the most important thing, and I see in the comments it's being discussed, that I have worked on today has been the Lupus Patient-Focused Drug Development Initiative. The 3 national lupus organizations came together and we held a meeting in 2017. We did a pre-meeting survey where we had 2,100 people respond. We have a tremendous amount of data, 42 questions. And we then went through, we had all of these people apply to come in for the actual meeting to be held in Bethesda, Maryland, near the FDA. But we wanted to choose people that represented the diversity of the patient population, including geography, time to diagnose, years to diagnose, diversity of the disease, mild symptoms, major symptoms, whether they had kidney disease or brain involvement, organ involvement, age, ethnicity, and gender. And we worked together. It was a collaborative initiative. It was amazing to work on this. And we brought people in from all over the United States. We had one of the most successful externally led patient-focused drug development meetings, or PFDD as we call them. And we had over 45 people from the FDA in attendance too. We had 650 people, 350 there in the room and 300 virtually who joined by webinar. This is all recorded and there is a website, lupuspfdd.org, and you can go in and see the recordings, 6 hours of recordings. You can read our final paper and report to the FDA. And you can actually see the survey questions. This helped our community tremendously in bringing them together and letting them know that we cared. And it opened the eyes of the FDA to understand that people like me might look great, you know, makeup and attitude make a lot of difference. But we live with a life-threatening, life-altering disease that is debilitating. Many of us have almost died in our lupus journeys. We take horrendously toxic treatments that are not even approved for our disease because there's so few treatments out there. There is a critical unmet need to have better diagnostic tools to learn about the pathogenesis of diseases like lupus that are so heterogeneous and complicated, and to drive research forward with the patient voice. And we need processes put in place for diseases that don't meet the standards of rare disease, but are still unmet need, to speed up trial development and to maybe think about groups like us a little bit differently. We would hope that the FDA is going to take that data and that they're going to move forward. We have over 41 drugs in development right now in the pipeline for lupus. It is the most exciting time we've ever had in our community. And we're trying to spur the trials to go forward and partner with the researchers and the drug developers and make our voice heard at the FDA. And I encourage anyone who has an opportunity to speak at an advisory committee meeting. I am more than willing to walk people through it. It's the most amazing experience. or to get engaged in your community's patient-focused drug development initiative if you see that there's one coming up. federalregister.gov is a great resource to go in and look at what different diseases might be hosting an advisory committee meeting in the near future, and where you might be able to give written or oral comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. That was very, very informative. And yes, we have received a link on PFDD, so we can take a look at the pictures, etc. Begonya, there's a question that has come through the chat, and it's an important question as we think about advocating for ourselves and advocating as advocates to the investigators and to the physicians that are treating the patient, that when a patient brings in something that they have found as new research or new information on the web, and they bring it to the doctor, sometimes, you get the eye roll that look at, here is another one, that they read something on the internet and here they bring it to me. And maybe I know something about it, maybe I don't know anything about it. So what, in your point of view, maybe Begonya, you can start, and Tamás, then you can add on to that, is the best way to get that dialogue going? It's not just about clinical trials, but it's in general about research.
Yeah, I think that it's very important to have a close relationship between the patients and the clinicians. In this sense, also, we have trained our clinicians and our researchers about what is advocacy, what means involve patients in clinical trials, because usually they only see the clinical phase of the process. But from the other side, patients trust in the information, trust in the recommendation of the doctors, and also they want to see that the information that they receive is something that they can understand and help to take a decision. This is something that it's known as health literacy, but in some cases, when we talk about children or also in adults, this is not a common practice, because sometimes the role of the clinicians and the researchers, it's very paternalistic, the role. And sometimes this is not a decision that it's not taken with this dialogue, with this close information, and sharing the pros and cons of the process. When we talk about the child, we are helping a lot internally in our institution to develop the right educational materials to make easy the process to understand information for kids, because obviously they have never listened about what is a clinical trial. We have cartoons, we have videos, we have plenty of materials that the researchers can use to inform a child and the parents about a potential treatment that can be prescribed as a clinical trial to this family. And this is basically our commitment: ensure that the information is the right one. Also help to them that obviously they've tried to find information outside of the hospital. We have several websites that we use to publish and to educate the patients and the families about the field. But obviously our main idea in this point is try to explain to them that not all the information that you can find on the internet, it's the right one, it's meaningful, or provide fits with the needs that you need to have. And in this sense, basically for us, the most important thing that we need to do beyond to have all these resources, it's education, education and education. This is basically our main commitment. And I fully agree that sometimes beyond you are a patient, beyond you are living in first person a disease, you need education, because if not, we are talking different languages. And this is something in which we need to invest, because if we have more educated patients, we will have more advocates, and we can engage and involve more patients in the drug development process. And I think that this is a commitment from all the stakeholders, because at the European level, for example, we have a document that it's the principles to involve children and young people in regulatory activities, but still it's not a common practice. We need to prepare these young people to be in the table with the regulators, to have discussions with them. And I think that also academia, industry, and many of the different stakeholders involved in the drug development from the different perspectives. But I think that all of them, we are working for the patients, and we need to facilitate this training process with them.
Thank you. And Tamás?
I think it's Begonya has mentioned some of the really key points. I find that we are all desperate for results, and that there's also a great sense of community and solidarity. but it takes an awful lot of time, especially with the learning. And it's just only started. I mean, initiatives like patient education initiatives have been around for, let's say, maximum 7 years. And there were some sporadic initiatives before in certain disease areas like breast cancer or HIV, or to some extent tuberculosis, but there was no such a wide recognition of what is needed in order to be involved, what is needed in order to really make our voices heard. And it just takes time. And I also think that what makes this whole thing even more difficult is that that apparently patients and patient communities are in the best position to create this dialogue across stakeholders, because what is a key opinion leader or a lead clinician for a pharmaceutical company or for a research organization, that's probably my doctor. So I get to meet him or her more often than any researcher or any other researcher, because I have to go there for checkups. So it's easy. It's probably easier for me to establish rapport with these people, and that's actually also something that we very consciously try to make sure that patient communities are these mediators across stakeholders. But it takes an awful lot of time and effort, and patient organizations and patient communities are simply not sufficiently funded, not sufficiently organized, not sufficiently acknowledged to be able to make quick progress in this process. And I find that exactly this process has also been slowed down by the pandemic. Just to come back to this first original topic of this series of conversations, because it has sucked out so much energy and so much attention from patient communities, because we had to suddenly pay attention to so many other things, and while assuring that funding remains relatively stable, while making sure that events are cancelled but are not really cancelled and we can organize them online. So there was suddenly all this burst of work, which takes away the energy from providing education to our communities, from interacting with other stakeholders as clinicians and doctors. And yes, we should improve patient-doctor communication, but again, when am I supposed to do that on top of everything else? So I think that the better integration of this new concept, and this is a new paradigm of thinking, this is a new concept, but the integration of this new concept into all the thinking, or into all the thought processes and all the internal processes of all the stakeholders will take time. So we also have to be patient, which is, patient in the sense of being able to wait or have the patience to wait. So, and it's quite a burden, right? Isn't it? So on the one hand, I live with a life-threatening disease, or my child lives with a life-threatening disease. On the other hand, I must be patient in order to cope with all of these challenges and pace my energy and pace my funds and pace my contacts. So this is quite a challenging environment for patient advocates and patient organizations, and that's why I think it's so important that there is this dialogue and we can build solidarity across disease areas. We also find that there's a lot of competition across disease areas, which is unnecessary. But we should build this solidarity. There's a common goal that we want, and that's actually we want to live livable lives. I mean, it's that simple. Or we want livable lives for our children or for our elderly parents, whatever. So it's so simple, and that requires education. So that's, just take a step back. So the overall objective is just to create better lives, but that's not possible without rolling out knowledge.
Yeah, it's such a meaty topic that obviously the amount of time we have is obviously not enough. We have about 10 minutes. I have two questions, and these are for everyone. So if you could just take 2 or 3 sentences to, I know that the question is not easy to describe in 2 or 3 sentences, but that's what I'm asking you to do. And the question is related to digital platforms. So maybe Begonya, we'll start with you because you opened the meeting talking a little bit about big data and the use of digital platforms. So what do you think are the advantages or disadvantages of the digital platforms? And is there any advice that you have for advocates and patients and maybe even physicians and companies? It's a huge question, but I want a very short answer, if you can, how to use these or any advice that I should take with me.
Yes, I'll try to answer because for us, at least in this project, the Fuehrer, it took to us a lot of time to develop the platform that already is open and working, because we have had discussions to try to provide added value to other platforms, because this is not the only platform that it's working now to foster research in general in the field of health. The point here and the most important benefit, I think, in the design that already we have of our platform, it has been working with the patients. We have 2 patients organizations in the consortium of this project. One is the Melanoma Patients Network in Europe, and the other is the World Duchenne Organization. But beyond this, we have developed plenty of co-design workshops. It means that we have had discussions with the patients because at the end, no, they are the users of the platform. And at the end, no, we have shaped a platform that we think that can help to answer research questions accordingly with different needs. Sometimes you need, beyond to be involved in a project and donate medical information, you need to find a peer, you need to share knowledge and experiences. We have a community. But beyond all of this, the main concern usually it's about shared data, because you know that usually not all the patients have been educated about this, and sometimes the first thought that they have in their mind is that it's something that probably it's not positive for me. But here, at least in Europe, we have a very strong regulation, the GDPR, that help us to protect the rights of the patients and to facilitate that if you have the right tools. Obviously this needs to be in a private environment, you need to have the data in a secure also environment, and have, in this case, the leadership and the ethical approval of a hospital, of every research project. You always work to benefit the patients and to protect their rights. But beyond this, again, I will to highlight the education and the information. It's important. Patients need to know that probably this is the only way to collect knowledge around the world, because we have diseases that probably in one country we can have 1 or 2 patients. We need the digital platforms. But obviously we need to educate the patients to use the platform and also follow the ethical principles and the regulation about the data. But for me, it's no discussion about the benefits when you know what is behind of this kind of platforms. And obviously, I want again to highlight that when you work with the patients, obviously it's easy to define and to shape a project that can answer their needs. And at the end, their needs sometimes are very close with the needs that other stakeholders and researchers can have.
Thank you. Oriana, your thoughts on advice to patients for digital platforms, just 2 or 3 sentences.
I think digital platforms can help really patients being engaged. Patients meet others in the same circumstances and share information, valuable information, and that it makes made the difference for me, and I believe it will make the difference for a lot of people. And young people are born in a digital era, and we are used to digital tools. So the sentence, the phrase of not Google it, it just is not a good phrase for us. We will Google it. We will use the digital tools and can be valuable. Obviously, we can have some traps also in digital tools, but it makes the difference, I believe.
Yep, Google has become from a noun to a verb now, so you can actually do it. Kathleen, anything from you to add to that?
I would just add that digital platform and the World Wide Web has allowed millions of people to connect virtually, and in the healthcare community allows all stakeholders to work together and collaborate, not compete. But I think the most important use we have seen beyond education and empowerment is that people who can't leave their home because of disability or where they live, don't have the means, can raise their voice and make their voice heard on whatever issue is out there. They can contact state and federal legislators on issues. They can do virtual testimony in state houses and with the FDA, the FTC, the WHO. So I think it gives the world a voice. I do want to caution that there's not always reliable information on the internet, and we try to teach and educate our patient population and their loved ones about that, to only go to reliable sources and to be careful, you know, what you post, because you never know who might be reading it. But overall, it's a very positive addition to our world.
And on that question, Tamás, your thoughts?
I just one sentence actually, or a very short report back about what's happening in Europe here. There are a couple of really large big data projects, and that's moving away from like digital tools in our everyday lives, but more building digital platforms for better research and for better outcomes and for faster research. So these large big data platforms are crunching data in prostate cancer, in Alzheimer's disease, in leukemias, in various hematological malignancies, and in cardiovascular diseases. So there are 4 different platforms for these, and all of these have been built up with very active patient engagement, so that patients have been in these consortia working on these digital platforms, and these are partly funded by public monies from the European Union. So patient communities, patient organizations have been there from day one in order to define the outcomes, in order to define what meaningful research means for the patients from the patient perspective. So it also, using these tools on a broader scale, also allows patients to influence which direction research goes, and how that can then improve the lives of patient populations, especially in rare diseases like hematological malignancies are usually rare. And it's very difficult to find meaningful sized patient communities. So looking at retrospective data and combining the data from a number of clinical trials, you can simply come to better results because you have larger data sets. So there are some initiatives there which already show that there's a way forward, and that's very reassuring.
And Tamás, before I let you go on that one, maybe we'll start in the reverse order with you as we come to a close. If again, in a couple of sentences, you want to share your takeaways from today. It has certainly been absolutely a learning experience from me, and I've been humbled even more now. But let's start with you, Tamás, your takeaways from the day before I close it with turning it back to Dan.
I think once again, I see confirmed that we may be living in very different places. We may be doing very different things, but we really do the same thing, and we should do it together. I mean, that's what I've been preaching for forever already in the HIV community, and then moving forward in a number of other disease areas. I think that we should work together more because we have so much in common.
Thank you, Tamás. Kathleen, a couple of sentences for you.
Well, I would echo what Tamás just said. We all are in different disease communities in different parts of the world. However, we have so much shared practices and journeys when you look at it, and our goals are very similar. Why reinvent the wheel? We all have resources, we all have expertise. Let's pool our resources and expertise and come together. Collaboration is the key, and sharing. And I again give kudos to Bristol Myers Squibb and Gryt Health for this forum, which allows us an avenue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Oriana?
Thank you. I think it's really important to share our goals and our voice, because it makes a lot of difference for other patients out there, and it's really important to give this reality. When you read a paper, a medical paper, you don't see the reality of the patient, and sharing your voice, you are showing to the others that we are normal people and everybody can have a disease, and we are seeing this happening with the COVID. So we should be out there and join forces, as has been said. And basically, I believe that patient advocacy is changing the life of so many people and saving lives, and that is really important. Thank you.
Thank you. And Begonya, your thoughts on today and any takeaways?
Yes, my first thought is related to when engage the patients. For me, it's crucial to engage as soon the better, because we have discussed this afternoon that it's the right moment, because it's when we can be involved in decisions, because in some phases, if we do this too late, we cannot change or really perform real patient-centric clinical trials. And my second thought is that when we talk about patients, we talk about all the patients. It means children and young people. It means other kind of groups of patients that probably they need specific tools or a specific training. But I think that all the patients deserve and have the same rights to be engaged and to be involved.
Thank you. And I applaud you all for being candid and openly sharing your experiences, your thoughts, as well as bringing the experiences to then share as to how we can go forward. I have a few takeaways of my own. Number one, listen to the advocates, listen to the voices, and listen to them as early as possible in the drug development process. I've been in that for 20 years now, and I certainly welcome that thought even more so now than I've ever had before. Number two, don't forget rare diseases, don't forget pediatric patients. They may have a lower voice, but it's a very important voice, and we have to pay attention to this. There is no choice on that one. Number three, I think technology is here to stay, and technology can make us more powerful. Let's combine our resources so that we can be even more productive than we have been to date. And number four, evolving research will give us more strength to be able to bring that forward in all directions. It's almost like a triangular way or quadrangular way of thinking about it, from a regulation perspective, from patient perspective, from the treating physician perspective, and the industry perspective. And we all have to work together. And I think, Lauren, you said it very nicely in the chat. It is the same goal. It is that one particular patient at a time that we have to pay attention to. These are my takeaways, and let me just pass it back over to Dave. Dave, thank you for the opportunity for letting me moderate this. And I learned a lot. Hopefully you gained something too.
Oh my, what a session, what a conversation. Dr. Hirawat, may I ask you, you asked the question so eloquently to our panelists. You said, what is it like to be an advocate and to be a voice representing? And I'd love to know the same thing from you. What is it like to be a physician and now in a role where you get to look across all of these areas and consider how to include these voices in the work you do?
Absolutely, Dave. So my passion has been there, and it didn't come on day one 20 years ago, because as I said, as you become a physician, you think you know it all because you read it in the book. But your experience teaches you that you didn't. In fact, that was just the beginning of what you're going to learn as you go through life. And as people at my new job and in my previous job will tell you, I don't let any registration study go through until we have sought insights from a patient, for example. In fact, it's taken a step further now, because as we go through some of our governances, our CEO has started asking, what input did we get from the investigator and the patient? Do we have any thought around, is this what is going to satisfy the community at the end of the day? So I think those are the kinds of things that these are small steps, but they have huge repercussions as we think about the future.
I love that answer. And when we think about the infrastructure, I mean, these are almost daunting things to tackle. We're talking about healthcare infrastructure and drug development infrastructure. And to know that the leaders of this care this passionately about our voice and patients being heard. I just thank you, my deep gratitude for you and how genuine this panel was. And I also want to thank Danielle Halstrom, who introduced us. Danielle is the head of advocacy now for BMS. And to know that people are championing this way. I love that we talked about advocacy as patients, advocacy as industry, advocacy as providers and physicians. And it was just such an amazing combination of all the views. I've gotten to know Kathleen and Oriana and Tamás and Begonya over these past several weeks. And your passion inspires me so much that I'm just overflowing with the things that I want to say, and I've got 4 minutes to say them. So I'm going to try to do it very succinctly. There are moments, usually they're quiet moments, where members of our team with Gryt share things that surprise themselves, right? They didn't realize that they had anger or rage or fear, all these things that we experience. And to get to work in an environment where we can be this open about it and talk. And I think, Begonya, you mentioned in your comments, you used the word angry at one point. And I just want to share, I was trying to think about the moment that I became an advocate. And that's what I've been reflecting on through this conversation. It was after my second cancer diagnosis, and I was referred to an endocrinologist because I no longer produced hormones. And I faced the reality that I would not be a biological father. I would not produce my own hormones. And so I went to an endocrinologist who would prescribe for me the therapy to balance my hormone levels. And everyone in the waiting room was the traditional cancer patient age. You know, they were much older than me. And the physician treated me as he treats all of his patients. And my hormone levels as a 30-year-old were lower than men in their 60s and 70s. And I spent a year of my life begging to be heard, right? I'm different. I need something different. And I was so filled with anger that I wasn't being treated as an individual. And I think it's that moment where I felt helpless and I didn't feel like I had a voice that I want to get away from as much as I can. And knowing what it feels like, Tamás and Kathleen and Oriana and Begonya, you spoke so eloquently about that feeling of being a patient and what drives us. And so I share that with everybody in our audience. You know, whatever experience in your life creates that fire in you to know that something better is possible and that your voice can be a part of making that better a reality. That is why we are advocates, and that is what advocacy with an A, a capital A, means. And I want to close our session with my incredible gratitude for everyone at Bristol Myers Squibb for supporting this program and bringing it to life. To our team, everyone at Gryt Health that lives patient and advocacy together. For our colleagues at EUPATI who are helping to tell the story and elevate humanity. And to everyone here, we are a part of something that is bigger than us as individuals. And Lauren, I saw in the comments, said to work across disease areas and to know that there is solidarity, that we are together, and we will not only get through COVID, we will get better because of this moment. There's just a couple things I want to end with. On August 6th, we are having an exhibitor day. And so once this session leaves, if you want to go explore the exhibit hall, perfect. Oh, wow, that's fantastic. If you want to go explore the exhibit hall, there are almost 40 booths from these organizations, all interactive. And on August 6th, at 7 in the morning Eastern until 9 in the morning Eastern. They will be live attendees at the booths. And then also the same day, August 6th, from 1 p.m. Eastern to 3 p.m. Eastern. The booths will be open again, and so we'll have attendees, and it'll be a live virtual day. If you're already registered for this session and watching here, you'll get more information. If you're watching us on Facebook or in the recording, visit Gryt Health anytime, Gryt, and there's more information there. And as we close this 10th live session together, I look forward to seeing everyone on August 6th. You heard Danielle in the beginning say we're coming back live in September. Please, we want to hear your thoughts and feedback and co-create the rest of the fall together. And I just share my gratitude and how humble I am to be a part of this with you. Thank you, everyone.